please. Don't need to record this one. Oh, did you? Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Let's just go around and introduce ourselves first. Mayor, would you start?
Mayor Kevney, City Chubbuck.
Shane Groh, Assistant Chief, Pocatello Fire.
Ryan O'Hearn, Fire Chief, Pocatello Fire and Bannock County Ambulance.
Tony Manu, Bannock County Sheriff.
Aaron Hunsaker, City Council President McCammon.
Carleen Hall, Mayor McCammon.
Carol Tubby, Bannock County Commissioner.
Ernie Moser, Bannock County Commissioner.
Jeff Huff, Bannock County Commissioner.
Nancy Allen, Deputy Clerk.
And I'll just go ahead and turn time over to Commissioner Huff.
Okay. Well, I'm excited because for me, this has been a work in progress for about a year now, and I'm excited to be here today. And it really kind of resurfaced itself because I think Mayor England and I had a discussion about this a couple of years ago when I first came into office, and I started poking around, and then I met with Fire Chief Kettner from the North Bannock Fire District about a year ago and had some discussions, and then about a month ago, Chief O'Hearn and I went to lunch to talk about some stuff, and found out that we were both on the same page of we need to talk about getting some ambulance service in a couple different parts of the county. And Mayor Hall and stuff, they're working on a new fire station down there, and they've reached out a couple times and had some discussions. So I thought it was time to try to get all the parties back to the table again to see if we can do something about our growing population and our ambulance needs. And so as Chief O'Hearn and I talked about it, we met today just kind of in preparation. We think it boils down to two separate issues. Number one is putting an ambulance in Chubbuck, and number two, the potential addition of a quick response ambulance service down in the McCammon area to serve the south end of the valley. And so with that brief history, I've asked Chief O'Hearn to kind of go over some statistics about where we're at, call volumes, things like that, so we have a basis for discussion, and then we'll go forward from there.
Well, thank you, Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to talk about some of these opportunities we have for our service. As you indicated, we are seeing call volumes rise. Last year was our busiest year on record, and the call volume, as you'll see in some of the numbers I go over later, have been increasing steadily over the past 4 years in our North Bannock County area. Currently, we run 3 fully staffed advanced life support ambulances in Bannock County, and those are stationed in the population center. And the main call density still is in the Pocatello Chubbuck area. More and more, we are seeing a lot of growth in Chubbuck and North Bannock County. And if I say North Bannock County or Chubbuck, I don't mean that at the exclusion of the other one, but that is where there's a lot of growth going on, and we are seeing an increasing call density in those areas. So much so that in 2018, we ran just about 1,000 calls into that north area, and last year we ran almost 1,500 calls. So we had almost a 50% increase just in 4 years of service in that area. The effect that has on the system is that it means that our units are running more and more into that North County area, as well as the calls in their own zones, which are kind of the Pocatello zones. The ambulance has a larger zone that encompasses area outside of the city of Pocatello, but that fire station zone is kind of what we talk about when we talk about the Pocatello zone. And then the county ambulance serves not only that fire station zone, but also that Chubbuck or North Bannock County area. So when we talk about the issue that's really driving and affecting the service in the North County area, it's call volume. And as we've illustrated, it's increased tremendously over the last 4 years. That means that more and more we're seeing call overlap, where one unit may already be on a call and there's a second call for service in that area, and we need to pull a unit from further away, which leads to increased response times. I did prepare some response times. Right now, the time for one of our busiest ambulance unit to respond from Station 3, which is on Pocatello Creek Road, the average response time for them to get into their Chubbuck zone is 8 minutes, versus the response time into the Pocatello unit is onto that page here. It's just about 5.5 minutes. So there's about just not quite 2.5 minute differential in those call times. And then as we have more call overlap, that drives that. One of the thoughts is that there definitely is the demand on the service itself, the entire county service, but certainly for the citizens in that North County area to place an ambulance in that area. And whether it goes in the city of Chubbuck or in North Bannock County, or even in Pocatello on the border of where the new Northgate build-out is going on, remains to be seen. But somewhere where we can have them pick up a portion of that call volume, which would take some of the pressure off the other county ambulance units, and it would be better for the system as a whole as far as call distribution among units, and then also it would decrease response times into Chubbuck and that North Bannock County area. Some of the considerations for that would be, what it would cost to staff. And currently we run paramedic ambulances, but there are options, we could look at running, and it wouldn't be that necessarily the basic life support ambulance would go in North County area. We may decide that we want one advanced life support ambulance positioned in the North County area and one maybe in the South Pocatello area, so that they kind of overlap. And then in between, we might have 2 basic life support ambulances in Pocatello. So when I say bringing in a BLS ambulance, I don't want anybody to think that I'm giving them a lesser model of service. We want to make sure that we are flexible, and we haven't looked at a tiered service before, or haven't implemented it, but that's certainly an option. You could look at only staffing it during peak demand times. Our call volume is somewhat unpredictable, but there are some trends. We are a little bit busier from about 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Wednesday through Saturday than we are during the other hours and other days. So really it's just a discussion for what type of a service the taxpayers and the policymakers would like to see, and giving us some guidance to come with maybe some proposals or some different scenarios of what that would look like. So there's the staffing, and then, the actual housing, the unit
So
itself.
while we're at staffing, how many people per ambulance?
So
Like that.
the staffing on an ambulance is 2, and if we decided to run that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the increased staffing would be 6 personnel.
6.
Yeah.
6 FTEs.
Correct.
Okay. What's the average burden on one of those FTEs?
An average would be right at, maybe if you took the difference in page 2 of your packet there, I tried to show you what the average paramedic wages and benefits is, and the average EMT firefighter wages and benefits.
So about 100.
And so right around maybe 105 would be the break even between those two, if you were to average those 2 numbers out. And I tried to break it down further at the bottom of that page to say that, if we staff one ambulance with 2 paramedics, and that's one ambulance 24/7, so 3 shifts, it's $722,000 as an estimate, versus 2 EMTs would be $572. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that that EMT ambulance would go in North County. We would shuffle it around and put it where it made sense from a call overlap perspective.
Okay. Do you want to talk about South County?
So South County, we are also seeing an increase in call volume, but I think the main factor driving the issue that we would be looking to address in South County is the long response times to get an advanced level provider down there. We have some very dedicated volunteers in Lava, Income, and Downey, and we run volunteer staffed ambulances in each of those agencies. But it takes oftentimes, 20 to 30 minutes in the case of Downey for us to get an ALS provider from the population center down to Downey. And so what we would be looking to do there is to potentially staff an advanced level provider somewhere in the center of South County. McCammon is a likely area because it kind of can splinter and go whichever direction over to Lava or down to Downey. And that person ideally would be staffed 24/7 and provide immediate support. The call volume in South County between all of the service areas and the unincorporated areas of South Bannock County totals about 1,000 calls per year. So it is a substantial chunk of calls. Not quite what we're seeing in Chubbuck or our other North County, which is kind of what we refer to as the Pocatello Chubbuck area in any of those zones, but it is approaching it. And with some of the growth that's going on in South County, we only expect those numbers to increase.
Are you seeing the percentage change in South County as great as it is in the Chubbuck area, North Bannock County area?
I didn't run the same trend on the north or the call increase. I could provide you with that number, but I have to admit, when I was looking at some of these numbers, I was surprised at the number of calls that Income and Lava were running. All of the services down there are running almost a call per day, and those aren't evenly distributed, so there may be a day when they have no calls, and there may be a day where we have overlapping calls down there, and certainly in the summertime, Lava is very busy. So,
Yeah.
Question on your calls.
yeah.
Because how many of them are actually calls that just in the area of Pocatello, Chubbuck, and everybody where you call the ambulance shows up, the ambulance actually takes them to the it's an actual transport, and others it's just a show up, check them, they transport themselves or they don't seek medical. Do you have kind of that?
That's a good question. Roughly, I know that our no transport rate is probably around 40 to 50%. So about half of the calls we don't end up taking to the hospital, either because, well, in most cases, it's because the patient, after discussion with our providers, determines they either don't want to or it's not necessary to, but it's always there.
I was just curious too, if like in the south end of the county, is that not the same or is the same? Because typically you'd probably see in South County, they're probably freaking out a little bit more. I mean, if you're calling an ambulance in South County, it's probably a little bit more serious than, I hate to say than a fender bender maybe in downtown Pocatello, because, I mean, just as I think about it, when you're in the rural woods, you're going to probably, okay, we'll get you to the hospital, or, yeah, we really need to call. I was just kind of curious about that, if there's any way to maybe dive into that a little more, too.
I'll try to get some better numbers for you. I would hate to make a guess at that, other than to say that I would imagine that our no transport rates are probably evenly distributed throughout our system. So,
And it very well could be that way. And I just, curious with the, especially the tourists down in Lava and some of the stuff that, have a tendency to probably mess themselves up a little bit more than, the normal people that aren't jumping off
Diving off
rocks and doing things like that. Yeah.
So the interstate would probably be picked up by Downey and
Yeah.
Income.
yeah,
And that's the Bannock County ones that would
yeah,
be
that's what
included in
that Bannock County number represents. Those that aren't identified. Aromo would probably be in
Picked up by
that
Downey.
section there that aren't in another incorporated area. And I'm not sure why Aromo isn't called out on its own, because it certainly is a.
And then there's Virginia and Robin that are all kind of.
all those little communities down there. We call it the Marsh Creek a lot, and so that Bannock County is kind of a catch-all that isn't in one of those other zones.
Well, I know Income does a lot of calls on the interstate.
They do.
It's just-
I tried to break that one down using the same personnel numbers. Obviously, a quick response unit, we would be trying to put a paramedic in that unit. And if we did staff that one 24/7, that would be 3 FTEs for that, and that would be put right at about that $361,000 would be an estimate for that. And that's just for staffing, not for any equipment or overhead support, rent possibly for a location or any utilities or anything like that.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, correct, thanks. Some of the things that we would need to, questions that would need to be asked, right now, our agency has the infrastructure to dispatch these units because they're housed in our fire stations in Pocatello. If we move a unit out, we would have to look at the ability to have, I would assume Pocatello would dispatch that unit because they are doing the computer-aided dispatch where they run it through a program to triage the call to determine the level of severity and whether it's a life-threatening call or a non-life-threatening call. And if we had a tiered system, that would be the decision point where we decide to send a basic life support ambulance versus an advanced life support ambulance. So there would be some infrastructure cost there.
So the ambulance is dispatched differently than the fire departments?
Than the county fire departments,
Okay.
correct. Yeah, the county dispatch center dispatches all of the fire districts in Bannock County. City of Chubbuck dispatches their police and fire, and then Pocatello dispatches county ambulance, including South County, Pocatello City Fire, and police. With the upgrades that the 911 system has made recently to the different dispatch centers, I believe there is that ability to cross boundaries and have agencies.
With the technology, but you'd have to have your training aspect for those people to bring to that. Because they're not, county and Chubbuck are not trained in ambulance dispatch right now.
Right.
Yeah,
They
because
don't.
the ambulance dispatch is a whole different.
It's a whole different module, a
classification.
whole different ball of wax.
There's a whole different
Yeah.
triage
Yeah, and it's
section.
very complex. It's not like we would just say, hey, you guys are doing this now. There would have to be some substantial investment if we were going to
Well,
change.
there's better cooperation in 911 right now than there has been
Oh, yeah.
forever, so
Yeah,
I'm not a big concern about how we would cross that.
No, it's mostly not a functional concern, but an infrastructure concern that we would need to potentially upgrade some alerting systems in whatever location we put these units. So it's not a personnel or a cooperation concern from my point, but it would be some infrastructure costs because some of these station alerting systems can be fairly expensive, up to, maybe $100,000 for a unit.
Okay.
It's the analog of what we're putting in these dispatch centers, these expensive radio consolettes. We need the receiving portion of that in the stations so that they can communicate to each other.
Okay.
I tried to give you a little bit of a breakdown there on the third page with what kind of average call times we're seeing per zone, and that's where you can see that East Chubbuck is our busiest Chubbuck response area in North County, and that encompasses, most of that call density is right around the mall and that interstate exchange. There's an urgent care there. There's an assisted living center out off of Burley Drive. And so that East Chubbuck, kind of east of Hawthorne, is what that East Chubbuck zone is, and that's the largest driver of the call volume, and the average response time right now for that unit is 8 minutes and 35 seconds from time of dispatch.
For East Chubbuck, where they normally send out of Pocatello Creek, or?
Yeah, they normally come out of Pocatello Creek, and actually that time, I will say it's a little bit quicker than I thought it may be coming out of Pocatello, but it's because their call density is right there at one end of the freeway, getting off the off-ramp, if you will, and their station is right at the on-ramp, and so they actually have a pretty quick call. Ambulance 3 is our busiest ambulance in the county and also our busiest fire unit in Pocatello. And as that build out in Northgate happens, we're going to see that call volume increase, which means not only that about 30% of that ambulance's call volume right now is in that Chubbuck East zone. So they are very busy running into that area.
With that being said, is there any, is Pocatello gonna, I haven't heard if they're gonna build another fire station or something. I mean, I've always heard that they're gonna do something in Northgate. I mean, is that even in the planning process? Because that affects then some of these, conversations in as well.
It does, and I'm hopeful for that, but I have to admit that we're not actively planning a station right now in Northgate.
Okay. Where's the other station that they'd come out if they don't come out of Pocatello?
The one in Old Town.
Station 2.
Station 2?
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was, and that's the one that's over there off of Arthur? Hayes, yeah.
North Hayes sits there right at the end of Gould.
Yep, has a big tower.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Do you want to mention national standard times when you talk about response times?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Versus
Shane.
what we.
Yeah, that's a
standard
good
is.
point that, when I give you these numbers, it helps to know what our target is. And we try to hit a 4-minute response time from time of dispatch. We would like to have a station within 4 minutes of every call if we could. But we understand that as we get more geographically spread out, we can't have a station in every neighborhood. And so most of these times fall below that 4 minute. And that does include the turnout time. And so that's 4 minutes plus another minute to a minute and a half. So really, we're only slightly off in some of the Pocatello stations and maybe as much as 3 minutes off in the East Chubbuck zone, because about 5.5 minutes would be our ideal target to allow for 4 minutes of travel time and about 60 to 80 seconds of turnout time on those calls.
So as Chief O'Hearn and I talked about it, we immediately came up with what we thought were 4 easily identifiable hurdles that we kind of wanted to talk about today, and then go from there. And the first hurdle is the levy. Second one would be the staffing, infrastructure, and then dispatching. And so let's get the money talk out of the way. The levy is pretty much maxed out. And we have a little bit of room in there, but not enough to fund what we're talking about here. So this would be one of those things where we have to maybe go back to the voters and see if we can do something more with the levy. I don't know, Commissioner Tubby would know more about that than I am, but
Yeah, you'd have to do a levy override. Question on budget. Do you know what the average breakdown per person is for what we spend on, is there like a standard in the state? Because I've seen a bunch of people that want to yell at the ambulance levy. They're saying how high the ambulance levy was compared to Idaho Falls, but then when you actually look at the amount of people in their county to the amount of people in our county, they spend $28 per person, we spend $21. And I was just curious if there's a way to, like, if there's like a standard of like, hey, what's the average way to talk about this? Because I get sick and tired of listening to the levy half the time, because the levy, yeah, we're asking for, I just had it up there, I think it was like 1.7 million is what we ask in taxes on the levy. But when you divide that against 89,000 people, yeah, it came out to whatever it was, like 23 or 24. It was lower than what Bonneville County was asking for, 3.6 million in levy taxes. But our levy is higher because their counties were $6 billion more. So it just, and I was just curious in that, because that might also start helping frame that discussion. Because I mean, just as you look at it, I mean, looking at your budgetary numbers, I mean, you're talking 1 ambulance with 2 paramedics, and the 722, that is just the staff.
Correct.
And then you're talking the ambulances are what, 285, I think is what it was.
Yeah, 230.
You know, that we've been doing that. And we've actually done a fairly good job of keeping the ambulances in good rotation and that way, but we would have to purchase another one. Because, I mean, to tell you the truth, you're going to go and override it, you're going to need another ambulance instead of just, or 2.
We feel, obviously you never know for sure with grants, but the state of Idaho right now in their EMS grant this year has said that they're well funded.
So we might be able to get
We
2.
feel like if we went to them and part of a grant application was that we were trying to enhance the system, we feel like that would be a really strong application. Otherwise, and we would be able to, if, for example, we wanted to get this up and running and thought we could do the staffing component, but we were worried about the ambulance, we would rotate one of our reserve ambulances into frontline ambulance and maybe service and run that for a while. It would maybe impact some of our reserve capacity only slightly, but by placing one in service in frontline status, you automatically decrease that reliance on reserve capacity. And so we feel like we could accomplish that with existing apparatus, though we would need to have a plan moving forward, and that would be 1 more ambulance in the rotation for our capital replacement plan.
So maybe another question that, I don't know, this is just me thinking about this. So we are looking at an ambulance in Chubbuck and then a response vehicle in South County. So if you look at it from the call volume, yeah, it's 400 calls more. Why wouldn't we just look at putting a quick response vehicle out in the north end and one in the south end right now? Because if I look at it, if you're only taking 50% are going to ride the bus, That's 520 trips to the hospital and 727 in the north end. I mean, so for right now, I mean, we're starting to talk numbers, and there's a 200, yeah, that's 200, I mean, I get that, that's 200, but you know, I mean,
Could you survive with that?
could you survive that because of the
opposed to
budgetary restraints? Because if we don't get a levy override, I mean, there's just no way, I mean, the levy override is what would have to happen, and I don't even know if that would succeed. I don't know anywhere where that would be. But just in budgetary aspects of it, I mean, you could at least get a QRF. I don't know what's QRF. That's my
QRU.
QAU. Get the quick response unit. A little bit different response unit out there. But I mean, at least that's I mean.
Well, for years, Income's one that paid for the QRU unit in Income.
Yeah.
They didn't get any county funds at all. And they went on a lot of calls outside the city of Income.
Yeah.
The reason we like the QRU unit idea in McCammon is right now, if we have an ALS call in Downey, we send Downey ambulance and we also send an ambulance from
Yep.
Pocatello. So we're sending 2 units. If we put a QRU in there, up in Chubbuck, say, we would eliminate the capability of transport. It would, you know, we could send that QRU, but if they needed to go by ambulance, then we would have to send another ambulance there for that transport capability.
But if you have a QRU in South County, you still have to send an ambulance. It's the same logical, no matter where it comes from, you still have to send both.
Right, but instead of sending 2 ambulances, we would send an
QRU.
ambulance and a QRU.
See, and that's what I'm saying in Chubbuck, why wouldn't that same logic then carry over there?
It would be a benefit in the system, and certainly it could be a partial, you know, it would relieve some of those. Right now, we don't have doesn't mean we can't, but we don't have a system right now that dispatches a single provider to a call. We certainly could have that conversation, and that kind of delves into that community paramedic role that some jurisdictions are doing in different partnerships.
I mean, I just look at it, you know, I would love to, hey, yeah, let's do it all, but realistically, the course.
I appreciate that line of thinking, though, because that's a little bit outside the box.
It is.
If we put the 2 QRUs and 50% of your Chubbuck calls or in-town calls are non-deliveries, then the QRU could handle that for the majority of the calls and help me with my train of thinking if it's off, that the QRU gets there, it does end up being a delivery, and you're still only 5 minutes away, well, then you got some advanced life support there to get you through that 5 minutes until you can.
Well, and you can put your QRU then, you know, like I said, that's probably a little bit easier too for housing, is a little bit smaller unit. I mean, I'd use a Chevy Tahoe probably is what I would use out of the vehicles recommended, where you could have, I mean, and let's be honest here, I've evacuated people in a small thing if you really had to, but I'm sure that in your sorting system, when you're telling me, hey, yeah, I got somebody that's, you know, bleeding, broken bones, all that, we're probably not going to send we're probably sending the bus. We're probably sending the, you know what I mean?
Probably would send both.
It's going, you know, but, and the main reason I'm just going down this train of thought is, like I said, I mean, right now, that's, you know, half.
Cost of personnel.
I mean, you could do
Correct
both.
me if I'm wrong, but on these calls, you would send both, correct?
We would.
Because that, I guess what I'd say, I don't know for sure what to do in South County, but we already send our EMTs. They
And
like
that-
this small unit. They're going right now, and they're there before
Well,
the ambulance, and they take care of the small things and have it ready for when the paramedics get there. So I guess what I'm saying, we already have that basic unit.
Well, so then why are we dispatching the ambulance then is, but what my question is then, is I wouldn't be, you know, no, like seriously, this is my question then, is if we have EMTs that are on the ground then, and I get that, we're going through the sort, and maybe that's, again, goes back to your 911 issue, is we should be sorting, I mean, because if you call 911 and they're sending their EMTs and you're sending the ambulance, and we're at a critical stress point where we might already be double staffed, you know, having other calls come in out of different locations. I mean, I look at that, if they have EMTs that are hitting the ground, then I don't know why we would necessarily be dispatching the ambulance then at that time.
You know, it'd be interesting to have the doctors and the lawyers here to give us
Yeah.
some advice on that, but my guess is, if we didn't dispatch an ambulance because we thought it was a minor thing and it cost a life, we'd probably get sued.
Well, but I'm
It's
just,
happened in South County forever.
yeah,
so-
I mean,
No, we wouldn't. I mean,
You don't dispatch an ambulance, how are you telling me?
they didn't always when the QRU unit,
Yeah. The
when the
QRU
units
just
went
show
out
up.
from Income.
well, see, but what I'm saying is if you have a
Oh,
call
that's
in,
but that's because you had one from the city. This wasn't, so it wasn't.
Well, and that's this gets into a little bit of nuance maybe, but the responders in Chubbuck are the Chubbuck Fire Department.
Right.
And they're not a part of the county EMS system that has a response. The county has this responsibility to
Yes.
establish the ambulance service in the county. And so I'm just wondering if that creates a problem with us putting the liability on the city and saying, hey, the ambulance service is trying to save personnel or whatever. And so we're going to ask the responders from Chubbuck to go clear that call.
Well, but what I'm saying is
definitely
this-
want the attorneys and the.
If they're showing up, but what I'm saying is if they're showing up already, and right now there's an accident, and we have an EMS from any department that says, oh yeah, you look good, and they say, yeah, I decide not to go, and then the ambulance shows up, and the ambulance says, yeah, you should go, that you still have created a liability issue. That is still a liability hole, whether it's Pokies, Fire, EMS, or the volunteers, or Chubbuck, or whoever. So if we're sending an ambulance just to check them out and provide that service, then again, why did we send EMS from either side out other than just the ambulance verification of,
And Chubbuck's EMTs will cancel us quite often.
And I was gonna say, I could
So-
answer part of that. I'm personally aware of at least 4 different times when our EMS people literally saved lives. But the ambulance came and they did need to be transported, but they were able to get there in time to resuscitate, or I've got letters in my office.
Well, see, and that's what I'm saying, the quick response vehicle, I mean, you're still bringing a level of, it's not that you're not bringing, the only thing the quick response vehicle can't do is transport. And so that's what I'm saying is if we're looking at putting I mean, when I look at the times of where I at, so me personally, as I sit here and I look at where's the greatest thing is I would put my full-time ambulance then in South County because I got Downey as 21 minutes.
And I should qualify those numbers. Those are only our numbers. Those are not the Chubbuck Fire
Well,
Department's numbers, and they very well are probably hitting that 4-minute response time mark to have a first
Well,
unit on scene.
But that's what I'm saying though is I look at the area that the threat assessment level, the area with the highest threat assessment level is Lava's 19 minutes 45 seconds, Downey's 21 minutes, Income's 15 minutes, and North Bannock County, they're at 10 minutes. But the highest threat times that are assessed right now is that area that, let's face it, on a weekend, there's 15,000 people in Lava.
No, there's a lot more than that
Well-
in Lava on a weekend.
Well, you said on the board, how many, I mean, I was being generous, I was being polite.
Well, some of those spill over to McCammon too.
Well, but that's what I'm saying though, so are we looking at how are we determining where resources are spent? And this is the problem you run into, is as I look at it, yeah, we have call volumes that are a little bit different, but the thing that stands out then is the lack of time and response. So as I look at lack of time and response, we should be having a conversation then as the next ambulance go in South County. Because there is nothing, once you clear the gap, you got volunteers, and that's it. I mean, am I wrong in my thinking?
I think the only thing you have to consider is the number of, if you were to look at the ratio and say, we have 5,000 some odd calls in Pocatello, and so we're going to assume that the risk is higher in Pocatello. We have a better chance of one of those 5,000 getting or needing an ambulance versus the call in South County where they have 1,000 per year versus, so they have 20% of what Pocatello's call volume is.
Yeah.
And so the risk is higher here.
Well, and that's
we try to cover that risk
and that would go
more.
back to the conversation too of what type of risk are we, because we're assuming that all calls are the same or what is being called out, and that was leading back to my call of riding the bus, not riding the bus. What's the threat? What's the actual call that's being called out? Are we having because we have that in East Chubbuck, we have all the heart attacks, or because all those people that are getting called into that assisted living, those are all
Riding the bus.
they're dying. So we know that that's happening, or we have a freeway intersection on Chubbuck Road that's or Pocatello Creek Road, it's all the fender benders, and we're gonna have we got.
I'm using your analogy. I mean, you got 3 units here covering the 5,000. You got 0 units covering the 1,000. So there's other factors that go into that equation.
Do the ambulances in the South County, do they transport and meet somewhere?
No transport to the hospital.
We do what Commissioner Tubby's kind of suggesting. We triage the call. If it seems like we call it an alpha or a bravo, which would be in a lower level of life threat, then we would only dispatch the ambulance in South County, for example, Downey Ambulance. They would get on scene, evaluate the patient. If they felt like they could handle it, they would transport the patient to Pocatello. And the Pocatello units in North County would maybe have even been notified, or they would be turned around. But if they get there and they say, no, this person's having difficulty breathing, I'd like a higher level of care, then they would either request us or ask us to continue.
So with that same line of thinking, do we do that with the north end?
We could, those are transport units. in the south.
But that's what I'm saying though, is we're doing that to the south end. Why don't we do the same thing in the north end? Well, we just send the ambulance.
We, as the Bannock County Ambulance Service, don't have units in the north.
But
We're relying
what
on-
I'm saying is we're talking about theoreticals of moving, we're talking about moving units. Now, I'm getting into the gameplay of, let's not look at where our forces and facilities are at now. I'm looking at, okay, we need to cover this. What is the better force projection for this entire area? So as we start looking at that, where's the response time? How do we equalize response time? How do we equalize coverage per people? Does that mean we take an ambulance and put it on the north end of Chubbuck as opposed to downtown Chubbuck? Does that mean that we move an ambulance into the south, or we put 2 quick reaction units? That's what we need to start.
Put a unit in too.
Well,
Move somebody.
and that's what I'm talking about, is so we're starting to, for me now, I'm looking at the war game aspect. Okay.
That's the basis of this.
Yeah, let's have the
discussion.
conversation
Go
of
from
not
there.
kind of like, okay, so we have lessons learned that we've done in the south, lessons learned that we've done in the north. Where are we going to start projecting this to then, do we really need to go back to the voters and ask for a levy override? Or do we need to say, hey, the way that we have resources concentrated, do we need to move them? Do we need to move that ambulance out into Chubbuck right now and put a QRU unit, sorry, it's habit. Put a QRU unit, in the middle? That's what I'm asking.
Since we're kind of talking about that, let's talk about facilities and infrastructure. McCammon, you guys are trying to expand your fire station, and you've ran into some issues with your funding.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I was hoping this discussion today would help move that along a little bit for you. So what are you doing with your fire station down there now that would facilitate some of this?
Right now, we're postponing till spring to try to come up with some more funding to get it,
Cost overrun?
so that we can get it. I mean, the costs of building have gone up immensely since we started the whole thing, and
Are you asking what the building that we're building? So our goal, this started for us, I would say, I'm kind of with you, our concern, we had a community review 4 years ago, and a big thing that came out of that was response time and this was based on McCammon, which we're the only one without even a volunteer service.
Right.
That was part of what got us going on this, also fire equipment. And so the building that we have fully designed, and now we can't afford to build. We allotted a space potentially for an ambulance.
because we're thinking this needs to go for the next 40 years, and
Yeah,
so we're
and-
trying to think ahead a little
And we
bit.
knew all of the South County fire districts have talked for a few years about merging. Who knows if that'll happen, but because we knew that discussion had gone on, we decided to design our building with living quarters. So we put a second floor on it so that it could, whether it was for fire, ambulance, that it would have the potential to have
Cover
something
the-
staffed.
I've had people come before me two in the last week, talking about one fire district.
It makes a little more sense the more I've learned about it, but
It does make a lot more sense, and that's something I've been looking at for about a year. Again, the right players haven't been at the table yet.
That's another discussion.
Yeah.
That's a whole
We
other-
won't go there.
Yeah.
and just some of what we have heard is people have said the same thing in McCammon Central.
Yeah.
If that was all going to happen and if something like this was going to be placed, McCammon kind of makes sense as
The
a
hub.
place to put some of those things. So we decided, well, this is a once in a generation.
Instead, we've gone the other way, and you guys don't have anything, and the cities around you have an ambulance.
I know, what's up with that?
Past
Mayor,
mayors.
Talk about
I'm
what your
teasing.
plans are in the future
Well,
for.
we're going to be more than likely building a new fire station within the next year to get that started. That discussion's been going on for probably 2.5 years. It's the back end of our facilities study and what we'll be doing. We'll be going out for a bond next May. And, but we've got facilities to house an ambulance today. That can happen right now. We do not have paramedic. We do have EMTs, and could certainly staff at least one EMT to the ambulance. But we need to have help with paramedic, at least for now. So I guess my thoughts are that Chubbuck's about a third the size of Pocatello, and so we do think it's time to get an ambulance out there. I will say this, I have no, personally, this is talking Kevin England, not even Mayor England, I have no qualm with how it's been running. I think it's done fantastically. Even though our response times look a little high, we're saving lives every day. There's no doubt about that. I suppose the one thing I think could use some discussion, and I had this discussion with Howard Manwaring, so it was a day or two ago. In 1970, when they determined to have Pocatello run the ambulance, it made all kinds of sense. 95% of the population of Bannock County was in Pocatello. And so it was, you're talking oranges and oranges, literally. That's changed substantially, and so I was told at one point, and I think that maybe it was Steve Brown that told me, that there was some discussion going into looking into maybe a different way to run the ambulance service, maybe by contract or something like that. I think I heard about that for about 4 or 5 months, and then it kind of went away. And so I just think that maybe it might be time to have that discussion also. Could we change the configuration as run? I don't know how or even whether Pocatello subsidizes a bunch of this. Maybe they do, maybe I don't know. Again, not being involved in their finances, I couldn't tell you that. But I do know that what I do hear from my constituents is we are part of the ambulance district. We pay taxes in the ambulance district every time we pay taxes, and yet we don't have an ambulance. And it's kind of a tough one to, again, one of the things that I have done to sadly say, listen, it's not fair to say we don't have an ambulance, because again, right there in Pocatello Creek, that's right at our doorstep. And again, I think the response times are good. So I'm not sitting here saying it's a broken system and it's not working. I'm not saying that at all. I just think, again, I appreciated when I got this call. This is the first time in my 12 years that I've been called in by the commission to talk. I always come and talk to the commission, so it just felt good to say, good, I'm glad that they're bringing it up. So I just suggest that we look at that. You know, I know whenever you're talking life-saving emergency services, you can't use the same kind. In other words, it'd be easy for me to say, hey, the population's in Chubbuck, put it in Chubbuck. We're talking life-saving things. We can't make those decisions based just on dollars of population. We've got to make them where we're doing the best service for the folks. And everybody in Bannock County pays an ambulance for an ambulance district. And they do that why? We know we need an ambulance. It's like paying insurance. You hope you never use it. If you need to use it, you're darn glad you've got it. So it's a similar situation. So I certainly don't want to be a naysayer here or anything, but in representing the city of Chubbuck, I do believe that it's time. I've been told by several commissioners that the next ambulance would be in Chubbuck. Now, I've never got that in writing, so that's always been discussions. I understand that.
Haven't got it from the three that are up here now.
And I get that. But I guess what I'm saying, though, is, again, close to a quarter of the population of Bannock County is in the city of Chubbuck. And so I believe that it's time. But you have hard decisions to make. I know this game, believe me. I get to play it all the time myself. So I appreciate the discussion.
So talking about the facilities, you said you have places right now, the crossover of personnel and things. I think that would be quite a discussion. I mean, the chief's over it right now, and so who would be over the personnel? That's still a discussion.
Right, and Chief O'Byrne and I talked about that a little bit, and not that we came to any kind of discussion, but we did bring that up as, or is Chubbuck okay having a county EMT or advanced life support in their building? Help me with that.
We would be.
Well, there'd be MOUs that would have to be,
Certainly.
just like we're doing with ISU.
Obviously, we'd be open to that.
So-
Yeah.
And then the rent and whatever, I mean, there's a lot of discussions we have. And then, like I say, where you guys are at with your facilities right now, would you have any place to house it now?
Not right now.
So I mean, and so you put your project off a little bit, and so.
Well, and I'm grateful we're having this discussion now, because we are right now working with an architect to design a building. I'll go back right now and tell them that this needs to be part of the design. We need to look, at least it needs to be an option of what it'd be. The second discussion we're having is whether to build one new fire station or two small ones, two satellite stations. Because we've got an area in town that's growing, another one that's got all the potential in the world to grow, but isn't growing right now. So our other big challenge with Chubbuck is we've got that railroad track right down the middle. They park trains on there.
Welcome to Ingham.
Yeah, we get a call.
Canada too.
We're on the west side, we get a call on the east side, and that train's there, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So a lot of discussion's been having that at least a satellite station needs to be on that east side. So, again, this is a good time, I appreciate the discussion, it's a good time to be having it.
And honestly, we need to have the same type of discussion with North Bannock County about their building, about where they're at too. I mean, and then honestly, to me, if most of your calls are right there around the mall, Northgate doesn't seem, I mean, current conditions, Northgate doesn't seem like the ideal place to put it, plus the railroad tracks. So, just,
Yeah.
Yeah, our existing station would be ideal for that, because it's just a block away, so it'd be right there.
Well, and that's why I say I think that, I mean, there's a lot of, we're not going to solve this today. This is where we've got to start game planning. I think we need to start looking at like the level of calls, how we triage calls, start looking at that. Does it make sense? Okay, if they're going to have satellites, if you do two, do you put a QRU out at one and have, because maybe that's the farthest one out, and they're working out and coming in. Maybe and that's why I say we need to probably have a fundamental, like this needs to be as much data as we can. We need to start looking at this because if we don't have another ambulance and we just need to move and readjust and buy, and do stuff that way, then that's the option. I mean, best case scenario, you put it to the voters, they say, hey, here's another ambulance and here's all the money in the world. In reality, I don't know if that's going to happen because we have cities and schools and ambulances and other city. I mean, there's always, and so it's hard with those, and we all know how bonds may or may not go.
well, we've had bonds with the jail out there, and you can come up with the best plan that's out there, and the people may say no. It seems like
And you guys have
schools
to
is the only one
twice.
that gets a bond passed,
You guys
and
have
it
to
isn't
do
happening
twice
all
to
the
get your
time.
bond passed,
We
right?
did. We put that bond out there just a few weeks before, and we hadn't had time to let the people know or educate them. And it definitely helped to educate them the second time it did pass.
Yeah,
But
we know that, we've been working on it for 6 months, and again, we're going full force now, and we'll be going to a bond in a year. And we recognize that, we'll be educating the populace all summer long at each one of our activities in the parks and such. But I appreciate the discussion you're having, because I appreciate the fact that there would be a black and white way to make this decision, and that would be the wrong way to make it. Like I say, you've got to look at the whole ambiance that's working and make the best decisions you can. And Commissioner Tubby, you hit it on the head. I mean, we get knocked around by these levies all the time, and the levy doesn't tell the story. I suppose in open discussion, we ought to ask the legislature where if we put something on the levy and they want to, if we're going to ask for an increase, we need to tell people exactly whether to increase their taxes. It ought to go this way too, because it'd be interesting to show a low levy paying $28, a high levy paying $21.
Mm-hmm. And that was just,
a lot of people say, how's that possible? It's the levy game.
Well, and that was just
the levy game. I can give you some interesting things about levies where our levy went down for 3 years in a row. Yeah, but your taxes went up every year. So, the levy game doesn't work. But that would be a great thing to get out there education-wise. Yeah, our levy's higher, but your tax is lower. And people need to know that.
well, and how the services are awarded, because I got a little bored and I started looking at other ambulance services and districts and how they do that. Well, when I started looking at other ambulance, like Ada County run the ambulance, but they only are drivers.
Right.
They actually don't have, they're not their levels of service are actually built into their fire departments. So the fire departments are brunting the cost of the paramedics on scene, where the ambulance guys are
Just drivers.
more the drivers. They have the driver, and I think they have, how they had it broken up. So your levels of service, so it's apples and pears versus apples and apples. And so that's the hard part, that you got to talk to people, and your population breakouts are always different. We have a huge tourist area that swells and balloons, and you're more likely to have dumb things occur there because it's usually fun alcohol and motorized vehicles and other things that go into play. And then you get on to, we have the soccer fields and all the sports complexes and
Pebble Creek.
Pebble Creek.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that, and those are the things those are the questions I think we need to start asking and go forward.
Sheriff, you got any thoughts on this?
Correct if I'm wrong, I know back in my old patrol days, there was a QRU unit in Canada. Either
There was.
volunteers lived there,
They
or
were.
because I remember distinctly, at
There
least
were-
two of the volunteers lived there, or
Yes.
they had, or McCammon had the QRU, and it was so advantageous at that point when we had those QRUs.
We don't have anybody volunteering.
Right, and,
But all those were funded by the cities originally down there.
right.
Originally, Lava was the first one that got an ambulance. And then it happened in Downey, and then it come to Ingham. But it took a long time.
But
And
we've
the
had these discussions.
city's 100% funded.
In our agency, about the time they had QRU in McCammon, how advantageous it was, no matter where you were down south. They would respond, and they were there pretty dang quick.
And they had advanced life support, the
It
two
was
ladies that
pretty
were
awesome.
there, and they're not, they retired
Yeah,
a
they
while back.
retired
And
never had
nobody's done
anything
it
since.
since.
Well,
Yeah.
that was one of the things, talking about staffing, that was one of the things Chief O'Hearn mentioned, is a lot of volunteers are struggling to
And
get
that's it.
staffing now.
Exactly.
And
Nobody
this-
wants to volunteer, nobody even wants to work.
So the QRU down there would help solve some of that issues and stuff there, so. So from here, the question is, what do we want to do as a next step? Because this, we all agree that this is something that we need to take a hard look at and see if we can do something. Don't know what that may be, but what would be the next
I
step?
think one of the obvious ones is to see if we can get an ambulance funded through these funds that are available. However, that's going to make a huge difference. If we can get the ambulance purchased through these emergency funds that are on the table. Again, as I look at this, to me, as I've read through qualification, this is a no-brainer. This would be a real easy write-up to, this is why we feel you ought to give us these funds. But once that happens, there needs to be a full discussion on, okay, how do we staff this? We've got the ambulance, but there's a staffing issue here. It's a pretty good-sized issue. How do we go about that? And I think that's a legitimate question. I think that'd probably be the first step. If we find out that can't happen, we're back to square zero again. And in a big way, we'd have to be, because we'd have to say, well, we're going to have to purchase an ambulance and staff the ambulance, so we've got additional costs. So I think that's probably a good step. And then to go to our people, our professionals. I had a discussion with Merlin during the last couple of days, realizing I was coming here, and face it, they're the ones that they're the ones that are there on the road. They know what's going on. And the big question I asked him as I left him this morning was, are we ready to house it? He said, yes. Are we ready to staff it? Not completely. We'd be able to put some EMTs out there, but we don't have any paramedics.
I think, I agree with what you're saying, but I think we need like 3 different plans. We need to, I mean, it's okay to go look for the grant, but if we don't have plans, a direction to go, at least 2 or 3 plans that we can say, this is the one that we like, and if it doesn't happen here, we like this plan, and because we got to have something to present for that grant. So we got to come up with at least 2 or 3 plans on a direction, and
We need some more data. I think that's the big thing too, is the drive, because your COAs, your courses of action, you're building your most likely worst case and best case scenarios. Best case is, hey, voters fund it, we get grants, we get all this, how do we do that? Fire stations, that would be a determination in Chubbuck. A fire station in McCammon, that's going to be, maybe you guys decide, well, instead of building the whole enchilada at once, we're going to just scale down to fit the budget that we're in. I mean, we don't know, or maybe you're going to do something, or maybe you're going to stick with it. But what is your hard timeline? There's a lot of those things, and I think we need to get that data together, and I think that really comes into then building, okay, we're going to do this, do we need to, and then the really your decision point is, okay, we're asking for those ambulances, we're asking for these resources. If we don't get that, though, then what's our backup plan? Do we maybe move one of those ambulances out of Pocatello and restation it? Do we move a QRU unit into Pocatello and do that, and then, or do we use multiple QRU units around, or do we? That's, I think, where we really need to identify those issues.
So, what I would propose then, and maybe we have to ask the Board of Ambulance this question, but do we put together a little work group, kind of like we did our 911 group, to go take a month and look at some things and come up with some alternatives, or do we just send this group out and then reconvene in a month and pool our thoughts and come up with our 3 plans at that point in time?
I think we need to start working and researching.
there needs to be a work group, and I'd say that from the commission that you would do that, and you could pick somebody.
I think that'd be fantastic, because as I look back at how you did that with 911, we got the professional involved, the people who do this for a living, they know how it works. These two guys here probably have some good knowledge. I'm not the one that represents Chubbuck here.
No, somebody
I
from
don't have my
Chubbuck,
fire department sitting
somebody
there
from the
telling you
ambulance
they aren't gonna
district.
do it.
Somebody from there,
I think that would make sense.
Johnny Kettner's fire chief from
Ingham and
Ingham.
McCammon.
Yeah.
McCammon. I mean, as we're talking about it, he's the resource for all the local fire districts.
And they have access to all this data that.
Well, and that's
I
what-
was talking about.
Well,
That's
they're
what I
gonna
say
come
is-
up with the right questions too.
So let's do that, and then I'll put feelers out to everybody and set up a meeting for 2 or 3 weeks from now. That'll give Chief some time and the other people involved to gather some data, and then we can come together and do like the 911 group and see if we can formulate some plans to bring back and go from there. Is that acceptable to you guys?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Sheriff, do you want to have anybody involved in that, or you want to kind of come in afterwards?
We'll have someone, if not me, someone will.
Okay. Okay.
Because we can definitely get some data for down south as well, you know, that may or may not necessarily do it with these guys.
We should have pretty good data from the district, from the county, as
Yeah.
far as EMS responses, so I'll try to have that ready for our next meeting.
Okay. Well, we'll set something up then for either the 1st of June or the end of this month, and we'll reach out, see if we can find a date. That'll be our next step then. And then we can talk to you guys a bit more about if there's anything we can do to help you move, find some financing for the station. We'll go from
We
there.
have CCOG
Yeah.
reaching out and trying to help us be our
Okay.
writers and
That's all I have, Commissioner.
Good.
Okay.
Chair.
With that being said, our next meeting's at 2:30, so we're